Gabrielle Morrison had spent 11 years building her reputation as Chicago's most brilliant black prosecutor, with an 89% conviction rate that made her a rising star in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. But on September 22, 2023, exactly 12 days after her lavish $2.1 million Gold Coast wedding to one of the city's most powerful sports agents, she would need every legal skill she'd ever mastered to defend herself against 2 counts of first-degree murder, because the evidence against her was more damning than anything she'd ever presented to a jury. If you're fascinated by how betrayal can transform a champion of justice into a cold-blooded killer, and how the system prosecutes those who once controlled it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story proves that nobody is above the law they swore to uphold. But to understand how Gabrielle went from courtroom victor to convicted murderer, we need to go back to the South Side neighborhood where it all began. Gabrielle Marie Morrison grew up in Englewood, one of Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods where gunshots were the soundtrack of childhood. Her mother, Patricia Morrison, worked as a CTA bus driver for 25 years, navigating routes through neighborhoods that terrified most people. Her father had been killed in a gang shooting when Gabrielle was 5 years old, a murder that remained unsolved in a system that barely bothered investigating black deaths on the South Side. "The police don't care about us," Patricia told her daughter after another funeral for another young black man. "So you're going to become the person who does care. You're going to be the one they can't ignore." Gabrielle carried that mission like armor through every phase of her life. Valedictorian at Lindblom Math and Science Academy, full scholarship to Northwestern University, top of her class at University of Chicago Law School. She didn't just succeed, she dominated with a focused intensity that made her professors uncomfortable. Gabrielle was different, one law professor recalled years later. Most students want justice. Gabrielle wanted revenge against a system that had failed her family. Every case was personal. That's where she met Devon St. during a networking event for black law students in 2012. He was everything her mother had warned her about: smooth, charming, from Chicago's black elite, third-generation wealth from his family's sports and entertainment agency. His grandfather had represented Walter Payton. His father negotiated contracts for Bulls and Bears players worth hundreds of millions. While Gabrielle was surviving on ramen and student loans, Devon was driving a Range Rover his parents bought him for finishing his first year at Northwestern Law. They should have existed in different universes. Instead, they became obsessed with each other. Their 9-year relationship was a constant negotiation between her drive and his privilege, her trauma and his comfort, her need to prove something and his assumption that everything would work out. Devon eventually left law school to join the family business, St. James Sports Management, while Gabrielle entered the Cook County State's Attorney's Office in 2014 with a singular mission: prosecute every case like it was her father's murder. She started in narcotics, then moved to violent crimes, eventually landing in the homicide division where she became legendary. Gabrielle didn't just win cases, she destroyed defense strategies with surgical precision. Defense attorneys called her the executioner because of her success rate in death penalty cases. She prosecuted gang murders, domestic violence killings, armed robberies gone wrong. And in a prosecutor's office that was 73% white in a city that was 30% black, Gabrielle Morrison became the face of law and order for communities that had never trusted it. She understands what violence does to black neighborhoods, the state's attorney told the Chicago Tribune in a 2022 profile. She's not prosecuting from a textbook. She's prosecuting from lived experience. Devon's career was equally meteoric. By 2020, St. James Sports Management represented 17 NBA players, 12 NFL players, and was expanding into entertainment. Devon was on Forbes' 30 Under 30 list, profiled in GQ, living a life that looked perfect on Instagram. The proposal came in February 2023 at Alinea, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant. Devon rented out the entire venue, had celebrity chef Grant Katz create a custom menu, and proposed with a 5-carat diamond ring that cost more than Gabrielle's mother made in 2 years. "You're the only person who ever made me want to be better," Devon said, on one knee with tears in his eyes. Marry me, and let's build an empire together. Gabrielle said yes because she loved him, because they'd survived 9 years together, because her mother was crying happy tears, because it felt like the culmination of everything she'd worked for. A Southside girl who'd made it out, who'd conquered the legal system that had failed her father, who was marrying into Chicago's black elite. The wedding on September 10th, 2023, was featured in Essence magazine and on every Black Chicago social media account. 250 guests at the Art Institute of Chicago's Rubloff Auditorium. Gabrielle wore a custom Nina Tornai gown that cost $45,000. The reception featured performances by Common and Chance the Rapper, both Devon's clients. It was a celebration of Black excellence, of two people who'd made it against odds that were designed to break them. But excellence, Gabrielle would learn, is just another word for blindness. The first crack appeared on day 2 of their Maldives honeymoon. Devon was constantly on his phone, claiming a major contract negotiation with a Bulls player. Gabrielle, trained to read micro-expressions in hostile witnesses, recognized the tells. The angled screen, the quick swipes when she approached, the tension in his shoulders when notifications appeared. "Everything okay?" she asked on their third night, watching him type furiously during a private beach dinner. "Just work, baby," he said without looking up. "You know how these deals are." She didn't know. She knew the difference between work stress and guilty behavior. She knew body language that signaled deception. She knew, but she chose the lie because the truth would destroy everything she'd built. They returned to Chicago on September 17th, moving into the Lincoln Park mansion Devon had purchased as a wedding gift. A historic graystone with 6 bedrooms, a rooftop deck overlooking the lake, and a wine cellar that cost more than Gabrielle's childhood home. She should have been happy. Instead, she felt like she was suffocating in someone else's dream. The discovery came on September 19th in the most devastating way possible. Devon was at his office. Gabrielle was unpacking wedding gifts when a FedEx envelope arrived, addressed to her with no return address. Inside was a thumb drive and a handwritten note. "You deserve to know who you married." The video files were time-stamped over the past 8 months. Hotel security footage from the Peninsula Chicago showing Devon entering a suite with a woman Gabrielle recognized immediately. Kendra Phillips. Not just anyone. Kendra was Gabrielle's former intern at the state's attorney's office. A woman Gabrielle had mentored, defended when senior prosecutors wanted to fire her for mistakes, recommended for a position at a major law firm. Kendra had given a speech at Gabrielle's bachelorette party about how Gabrielle had changed her life. There were text messages, recovered somehow, and included in PDF format. Devon and Kendra planning their encounters while Gabrielle was in trial. Making jokes about the wedding preparations. Discussing a future where they could be together openly. The message that broke something fundamental in Gabrielle's mind was dated August 15th, 2023, less than a month before the wedding. "I can't keep doing this. Watching you marry her is killing me. Tell me we have a future." Devon's response: "After the wedding, I'll figure out. My family expects this marriage. Her family expects it. But you're who I want. Just be patient, baby. I promise we'll be together." Gabrielle read those words sitting on the floor of their $3.2 million mansion, surrounded by wedding gifts from people who'd celebrated their love. Her legal mind processed it with prosecutor precision. This wasn't an affair. This was a long-term relationship. Devon had married her knowing he was planning a life with Kendra. The wedding was a performance. Their love story was fiction. For someone who'd built their entire identity on reading people, on knowing truth from lies, on never being the victim, this level of deception was ego death. Gabrielle spent September 20th in a dissociative state that her defense team would later argue constituted temporary insanity. She accessed Devon's laptop. They shared passwords as a symbol of trust that now felt like weaponized naivety, and found everything. Calendar entries for hotel meetings marked as client dinners. Venmo payments to Kendra labeled consulting fees. Photos of them together, intimate and happy, that Devon had never deleted because he never thought Gabrielle would look. The evidence was overwhelming, and Gabrielle, trained as a prosecutor, began building a case. Not for court, for something else. Friday, September 22nd. Devon told Gabrielle he had a late meeting with a potential NBA draft pick. He kissed her forehead, adjusted his Audemars Piguet watch, and left their mansion smelling of Tom Ford Oud Wood, the cologne he reserved for special occasions. Gabrielle tracked his phone, a simple app they'd installed during the engagement for safety, and watched him drive, not to his office, but to the Peninsula Hotel. Room 2847. The same room number that appeared repeatedly in the security footage. She'd spent the previous 48 hours in a mental state that forensic psychologists would later describe as acute dissociative disorder. Her prosecutor brain was functioning, planning, documenting. But her conscious self had fractured into something unrecognizable. At 8:23 p.m., Gabrielle arrived at the Peninsula Hotel wearing a black wig purchased with cash from a beauty supply store in a neighborhood she'd never visited. Oversized sunglasses despite the evening hour. Clothing from a Goodwill in the suburbs. All bought with cash, all disposable. She left her phone at home, streaming Netflix to establish a digital alibi. She'd even scheduled social media posts to maintain the appearance of normalcy. But here's what Gabrielle didn't account for. The Peninsula had installed cutting-edge AI facial recognition after a high-profile robbery in 2022. The same technology she'd praised in a press conference about using modern tools to solve crimes was now tracking her every movement. Wig and sunglasses meant nothing to algorithms trained on biometric data. Room 2847 was a corner suite with lake views that cost $1,200 per night. Through the door, Gabrielle could hear music, John Legend's All of Me, the song that played during their first dance 12 days ago. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. She used a key card she'd stolen from Devon's wallet, a master key he'd obtained somehow, probably through one of his athlete clients who owned hotel shares. The suite's living area was empty, but voices came from the bedroom. Devon's deep laugh, Kendra's higher pitch, both intimate and casual, the sound of people comfortable with each other. What happened in the next 17 minutes would be disputed by forensic experts, psychiatrists, and legal teams for over a year. The prosecution would argue calculated, premeditated double murder. The defense would claim dissociative break triggered by catastrophic psychological trauma. The truth existed somewhere neither legal theory could adequately explain. Gabrielle found them in bed, tangled in sheets that probably cost more than her mother's monthly pension. Devon saw her first, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and terror in seconds. "Gabby," he started, scrambling for the sheet. "This isn't I can explain, don't." Gabrielle's voice was terrifyingly calm, the same tone she used before delivering closing arguments she knew would send someone to death row. "I'm not here for your lies. I'm here because I need you both to understand exactly what you destroyed." Kendra pulled the sheet up, her eyes showing fear and something else. Relief, maybe, like she'd been waiting for this confrontation, wanting the secrecy to end. "I'm sorry," Kendra whispered. "I never meant to. It just happened." "Nothing just happens," Gabrielle cut her off. "You made choices. Every hotel visit, every lie, every time you smiled in my face while sleeping with my husband. Those were choices." The physical altercation that followed was documented later through forensic evidence, but the exact sequence remained disputed. The medical examiner would testify that Devon died from blunt force trauma consistent with his head striking the marble nightstand corner during a violent struggle. 3 impacts, each progressively more severe, the third fracturing his skull and causing a fatal brain bleed. Kendra's death was more clearly intentional. Strangulation using the belt from the hotel bathrobe, applied with enough force and duration to indicate purpose rather than panic. The forensic evidence suggested Kendra died second, possibly while trying to help Devon, possibly while pleading for her life. By 8:40 p.m., 2 people were dead in the Peninsula Hotel's room 2847, and Gabrielle Morrison, Cook County's most feared homicide prosecutor, was sitting on the suite's couch, staring at her hands, realizing that 17 minutes had just destroyed everything she'd spent 33 years building. She didn't run. That's what would fascinate criminal psychologists later. She didn't attempt to clean the scene or create an alibi. She simply called 911, using the room's phone, and waited. "This is Gabrielle Morrison," she told the dispatcher with eerie calm. "I'm a prosecutor with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. I'm at the Peninsula Hotel, room 2847. 2 people are dead. I killed them. Send the police." When officers arrived 9 minutes later, they found Gabrielle sitting with her hands visible, making no attempt to flee or resist. "I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent," she told the first officer professionally. "I'm requesting legal representation immediately. I will cooperate fully with processing, but I'm not making any statements without counsel present." Even in complete psychological collapse, even having just committed double homicide, Gabrielle Morrison was still thinking like a lawyer. It's what would make her case so complex and so fascinating. Detective Marcus Washington had worked Chicago homicide for 19 years, but this case was unprecedented. The suspect was a prosecutor he'd testified for dozens of times. The crime scene showed evidence of both planning, the disguise, the cash purchases and chaos, the violent struggle, the emotional breakdown. "She's one of the best legal minds in the city," Washington told his partner while processing the scene. "She knows exactly how we investigate murders. Either she planned this perfectly and we're missing something, or she had a complete mental break." The hotel's AI security system provided the prosecution's strongest evidence. Facial recognition tracked Gabrielle entering through the south entrance at 8:23 p.m. despite her disguise. Her biometric data, gait analysis, facial structure measurements matched with 98.7% certainty. The video showed her taking the elevator to the 28th floor, entering room 2847, and not emerging for 17 minutes. She tried to use a disguise from 2005, the lead prosecutor would later argue. She didn't realize technology had made that irrelevant. Classic arrogance. The evidence kept mounting. The encrypted cloud drive Gabrielle had created to document Devon's affair became evidence of premeditation. The cash purchases traced through ATM withdrawals. The timeline showing she discovered the affair 3 days before the murders. Her own case files where she'd successfully argued that crimes of passion still qualified as first-degree murder if there was any planning period between discovery and act. State's Attorney Jennifer Kowalski, Gabrielle's former boss, held a press conference that was covered nationally. "This is a tragedy on multiple levels," Kowalski said, visibly emotional. Gabrielle Morrison was a brilliant prosecutor who dedicated her life to justice. But nobody is above the law. 2 people are dead, and the evidence demands accountability. Finding a defense attorney willing to take Gabrielle's case proved difficult. She knew too much, had worked with too many people, and her reputation for destroying defense strategies made her toxic. Eventually, Robert Shunn, a 64-year-old legend who'd successfully defended 3 death penalty cases, agreed to represent her. "You taught an entire generation of prosecutors how to win," Chun told Gabrielle during their first meeting at Cook County Jail. "Now I'm going to use everything you taught me to save your life." The media coverage was immediate and racially charged. Black prosecutor kills cheating husband dominated headlines. Social media split viciously. Some saw Gabrielle as a victim of betrayal who snapped under unimaginable pain. Others viewed her as a privileged professional who murdered 2 people because her ego couldn't handle being wrong. The racial dynamics were impossible to ignore. 3 black victims, a black defendant, in a city with a tortured history of racial injustice in the legal system. For once, they're prosecuting a black person with the same energy they usually reserve for black defendants, one activist told the Chicago Tribune. But this time it's one of their own, and suddenly everyone wants to talk about mental health and trauma. Gabrielle's mother, Patricia, gave one interview that went viral on Black Twitter. "My daughter spent her whole life fighting for victims," Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. She became a prosecutor because her father was murdered and nobody cared. Now she's the one who needs mercy, and I'm begging this city to remember everything she sacrificed for justice. The bail hearing was standing room only, covered by every major news outlet. Prosecutor Kowalski argued Gabrielle was a flight risk with legal knowledge and resources. Chun countered that she called 911 herself and waited for police, demonstrating no intent to flee. Judge Raymond Martinez set bail at $3 million, which Gabrielle's family and the Black professional community in Chicago managed to raise through a collective effort that revealed how many people she'd helped during her career. Released on ankle monitor, Gabrielle returned to her mother's South Side home, unable to face the Lincoln Park mansion that now represented everything she'd lost. The psychological evaluation became the cornerstone of the defense strategy. Dr. Samantha Rodriguez spent 60 hours with Gabrielle, uncovering a lifetime of trauma, perfectionism, and identity construction based entirely on never being a victim. When Gabrielle discovered the affair, Dr. Rodriguez would later testify, it wasn't just betrayal. It was complete identity annihilation. She'd built her entire self-concept on being smarter than everyone, on never missing deception, on controlling every situation. Learning that her husband had been lying for 8 months, that her protege had been betraying her, that her wedding was essentially a performance, it shattered every psychological defense mechanism she'd constructed since her father's murder when she was 5 years old. The diagnosis was acute dissociative disorder with brief psychotic features triggered by severe psychological trauma. Dr. Rodriguez argued that Gabrielle had experienced a complete break from reality, operating on autopilot using her prosecutorial training while her conscious mind had fractured. The planning that the prosecution points to, Dr. Rodriguez explained, wasn't calculated murder planning. It was a prosecutor's brain functioning in crisis mode, gathering evidence and preparing for confrontation, while Gabrielle's emotional self was experiencing complete psychotic break. She wasn't planning murder. She was planning to confront them using the only operational framework her broken mind could access, her professional training. The trial began January 8, 2024, in Cook County Circuit Court. Every major news outlet covered it live. The woman who'd sent dozens of people to prison for murder now sat at the defense table, facing life without parole. Prosecutor Kowalski's opening statement was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant is one of the most skilled prosecutors in Illinois. She knows how murders are investigated, how evidence is collected, how juries think. She used that knowledge to disguise herself, avoid cameras, and confront her husband and his mistress. The physical evidence shows she killed 2 people in a hotel room, then calmly called 911. This wasn't insanity. This was revenge executed by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The evidence was overwhelming. The AI facial recognition tracking, the timeline of affair discovery to murders, the cash purchases in disguise. Kowalski even presented Gabrielle's own closing argument from previous cases, showing how she'd argued against crimes of passion defenses by claiming any planning period negated temporary insanity. She knew exactly what arguments would be used against her, Kowalski told the jury. And she did it anyway because she believed she was smart enough to get away with it. Devon's mother gave victim impact testimony that destroyed the courtroom. My son made a terrible mistake, she said, sobbing. But marriage counseling exists. Divorce exists. He didn't deserve to be murdered because he was weak. Kendra was a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. They didn't deserve to die because someone's pride was hurt. But Chen's defense was equally powerful. He didn't deny the killings. He explained the psychological destruction that led to them. Gabrielle Morrison spent 28 years building an identity based on intelligence, control, and never being a victim, Chen told the jury in his opening. Her father was murdered when she was 5, and the system didn't care because he was a black man from the South Side. She became a prosecutor to be the person who cared, who fought for victims her entire life. When she discovered that her husband had been lying for 8 months, that her wedding was a performance, that the woman she'd mentored had betrayed her, something broke that couldn't be fixed. Dr. Rodriguez's testimony was the turning point. She walked the jury through Gabrielle's psychological history, childhood trauma, perfectionism as defense mechanism, identity built entirely on professional competence. The betrayal didn't just hurt her emotionally, Dr. Rodriguez explained. It destroyed the foundational belief system she'd constructed to survive her father's murder. If she couldn't trust her own judgment about the most important person in her life, then everything else, her career, her success, her identity, was revealed as potentially false. She described the dissociative state using brain scan evidence, showing abnormal activity patterns consistent with psychotic break. The Gabrielle Morrison who went to that hotel room, Dr. Rodriguez testified, was not the same person who'd prosecuted criminals for a decade. Her conscious mind had fragmented. She was operating on trained instinct, using her prosecutorial framework because it was the only cognitive structure still functioning, while experiencing a complete break from reality. The defense called former defendants Gabrielle had prosecuted, people who testified that she'd been fair, had pushed for lighter sentences when evidence was weak, had demonstrated empathy even when seeking convictions. They painted a picture of someone incapable of cold-blooded murder. Then Gabrielle testified against Chin's advice. She insisted on taking the stand for 8 hours over 3 days. Her testimony was raw, self-aware, and legally sophisticated in ways that both helped and hurt her case. "I know what the evidence looks like," she told the jury, her voice steady despite tears. "I've presented this evidence myself in dozens of cases. But evidence can't show what it feels like when your entire reality is revealed as fiction. When you learn that your wedding, the day you thought was the happiest of your life, was just a performance your husband put on while planning a future with someone else." She described finding them together. "I wasn't thinking about murder. I was thinking about every moment I'd missed, every lie I believed, every time Kendra hugged me at work while sleeping with Devon behind my back. I wanted them to understand what they destroyed. I wanted them to feel what I was feeling." Prosecutor Kowalski's cross-examination was surgical. "You're asking this jury to believe that a brilliant prosecutor, someone who knew exactly how to avoid hotel cameras, who disguised herself, who documented everything, you're asking us to believe you weren't planning to kill them?" Gabrielle's answer would define the case. "I was planning to confront them. What happened after? I don't recognize that person. That wasn't me operating. That was 28 years of trauma and control exploding because I couldn't handle being wrong about the person I loved. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking you to understand that I didn't decide to become a murderer. Something in me broke that I didn't know could break." The rebuttal psychiatric witness, Dr. James Foster for the prosecution, argued that Gabrielle's detailed planning, her disguise, her awareness of security protocols, all demonstrated conscious intent incompatible with psychotic break. "She might have been emotional," Dr. Foster testified, "but she was functional, planning, executing a strategy. That's not insanity. That's rage with intelligence behind it." The jury deliberated for 7 days, the longest in Cook County murder trial history. When they returned, the courtroom was packed with media, activists, legal professionals, and both families. The verdict: guilty of second-degree murder for both Devon and Kendra. The jury had found middle ground. They acknowledged the extreme emotional disturbance while rejecting the full insanity defense. They recognized that Gabrielle's planning showed some level of conscious intent, but the psychological evidence was enough to reduce from first-degree murder. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Kendra's family gave victim impact statements that left no one unmoved. Kendra was 28 years old. Her mother said, through tears, "She made a terrible choice, but she didn't deserve to be murdered. Now our family will never see her graduate, get married, have children, because someone decided their pain mattered more than her life." Devon's mother simply walked to the stand, looked directly at Gabrielle, and said, "I hope you live long enough to understand what you took from this world." Judge Martinez sentenced Gabrielle to 20 years for each count, to run consecutively. With good behavior, she'd be eligible for parole in 32 years. At 33, Gabrielle would be 65 when she tasted freedom again, if she ever did. "You were brilliant," Judge Martinez said during sentencing. "You dedicated your life to justice, prosecuting violent criminals, fighting for victims. And then you became exactly what you'd spent your career fighting against. You didn't just commit murder. You betrayed every principle you claimed to represent. That's not tragedy. That's catastrophic failure. Logan Correctional Center, Illinois. Gabrielle Morrison, inmate 87493C, spent her first year in prison in near total silence. Other inmates whispered about the famous prosecutor who'd killed her husband. Some saw her as justified, a woman who'd taken revenge on a lying man. Others saw her as everything wrong with privileged professionals who think their pain justifies violence. Patricia Morrison visited every 2 weeks, the 3-hour drive from Chicago becoming a ritual of maternal devotion. "You're still my daughter," she'd say through the plexiglass. "You made a choice that destroyed lives, including your own. But you're still mine, and I'm not abandoning you." The appeals Chin filed were systematically denied. The evidence was too strong, the jury instructions proper, the sentence within guidelines. Gabrielle would serve her decades with no legal shortcuts, no loopholes she'd spent her career exploiting for the state. But prison changed her in unexpected ways. She began teaching literacy classes, helping women who'd never had her advantages learn to read, to write, to understand the legal system that had failed them. She started a legal aid clinic, using her prosecutorial knowledge to help inmates file appeals, fight wrongful convictions, navigate a system designed to keep them powerless. "It's the first time I've used my legal knowledge without needing to win," Gabrielle told the prison psychologist during a mandatory evaluation. "I spent 28 years prosecuting people. Now I'm helping them. Maybe that's what I should have been doing all along." 4 years into her sentence, Gabrielle received an unexpected letter from Kendra's younger sister, Asia. The letter began, "I hated you for killing my sister. I still hate what you did. But I need you to know something she told me before she died." Asia's letter revealed that Devon had pursued Kendra relentlessly after she started working with Gabrielle. He told Kendra that his marriage was arranged by their families, that he didn't love Gabrielle, that he was planning to leave after a suitable period. "Kendra wasn't trying to destroy your marriage," Asia wrote. "She thought she was saving Devon from one he didn't want. He lied to both of you. He made you both believe competing stories. You were both his victims before you made my sister yours." The revelation didn't excuse what Gabrielle did, but it complicated everything. Kendra wasn't the villain Gabrielle had constructed. She was another woman manipulated by Devon's lies, another victim of his narcissism. Gabrielle wrote back, "Thank you for telling me, even though I don't deserve your compassion. Your sister deserved the truth from both of us, Devon and me. She deserved better than being caught in his lies. She deserved better than dying because I couldn't handle my pain. I'm sorry I took away her chance to realize what he really was and find someone worthy of her." The correspondence continued for years, evolving from anger to understanding to something resembling conditional forgiveness. Not of the murders, but of the brokenness and manipulation that led to them. The St. James family never forgave Gabrielle. Devon's mother started a foundation for domestic violence prevention, speaking about how abuse isn't gendered, how emotional manipulation can flow in all directions. "My son was a liar and a cheater," she'd say at events. "But he didn't deserve to die. Nobody deserves to die because someone's feelings got hurt. Murder isn't justice." The case sparked nationwide debates about crimes of passion, about whether psychological trauma should mitigate murder charges, about the dangerous intersection of intelligence and instability, about how the legal system treats professionals differently than poor defendants. Law schools studied Gabrielle's case as an example of how legal knowledge can be weaponized. Psychology programs analyzed her breakdown as textbook identity-based trauma. True crime podcasts dissected every detail, with audiences split between sympathy and condemnation. After 9 years, Gabrielle's first parole hearing arrived. She sat before the board, no longer the sharp prosecutor who'd dominated courtrooms, but a woman who'd spent a decade confronting what she'd done. "I don't deserve parole," Gabrielle told the board plainly. "I took 2 lives because I couldn't process betrayal without violence. But I've spent 9 years trying to become someone who could live with that reality, someone who could use what I know to help rather than harm. I understand if you deny this. I would have denied it too when I was a prosecutor. The board denied parole unanimously. She'd serve at least 8 more years before her next hearing. Gabrielle didn't appeal. She returned to her cell, to her students, to the legal work that had become her atonement. She'd spent her youth building a career. She'd spend her middle age trying to earn redemption that might never come. Patricia visited the following week. "I'm proud of who you're becoming," she said, and Gabrielle cried for the first time since sentencing. "How can you be proud? I destroyed everything you sacrificed for." "No, baby. You survived something that destroyed you. Now you're building something new from the wreckage. That's what I taught you growing up in Englewood. How to survive what should have killed you." Gabrielle Morrison will be eligible for parole again in 2041. She'll be 51 years old, having spent nearly 2 decades behind bars for 17 minutes that destroyed 4 lives. Whether she deserves freedom is a question the parole board will answer. Whether she's earned forgiveness is something only the dead can judge. But in the meantime, she teaches. She learns. She helps women who remind her of who she once was: brilliant, driven, convinced that intelligence can protect you from catastrophic choices. "I was one of the smartest prosecutors in Chicago," she tells her students, "and I made the stupidest, most destructive decision possible." Don't ever let anyone tell you that education makes you immune to violence. It just means you have no excuse when you choose it anyway. The case of Gabrielle Morrison remains one of Chicago's most discussed tragedies. The black prosecutor who knew better. The betrayed wife who chose murder over divorce. The woman who had everything and destroyed it all because she couldn't handle being deceived. There are no winners in this story. Devon St. is dead. Kendra Phillips is dead. 2 families are permanently shattered. Gabrielle Morrison is alive, but serving a sentence that might last the rest of her life. The woman she was died in that Peninsula Hotel room alongside her victims. What remains is someone trying to answer impossible questions. How do you atone for the unforgivable? How do you build a life worth living after destroying others? How do you accept that 17 minutes of violence erased 28 years of dedication to justice? Gabrielle doesn't have the answers yet, but she has 23 more years minimum to figure it out, teaching women the legal system failed, helping inmates navigate the same courts where she once stood as prosecutor, trying to create some small amount of good from the catastrophic evil she committed. She'll never practice law again. She'll never have the career she built. She'll never escape the knowledge that she became exactly what she spent her life prosecuting: a murderer who justified violence through pain. But maybe if she survives long enough, she can become someone whose story prevents even one person from making the same catastrophic choice. That's not redemption. But after what she did, it might be the closest thing to it that exists.